Hi, and thank you for joining us on Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And in this segment each week, we invite you to send in your questions, share your curiosities, share your wonderment about the city of Mississauga. And we can explore the story of this place, the history of Mississauga together. We also ask you to take a moment out of your busy lives as we deal with these unprecedented and historic times, as we are challenged with the current COVID-19 pandemic, to record your memories, your stories. Become a story creator, a record creator, not just a record keeper. These are times in which we're looking for residents to share their stories and pictures of life during COVID in the city of Mississauga. As things that we can record for future generations of this moment in time. But again, through Ask a Historian, we are inviting you to send in your questions and your curiosities about the city of Mississauga, and we will have some fun exploring the remarkable story of the city of Mississauga together. Thank you. Our first question this week on Ask a Historian is regarding that of an elephant. One of my favorite inquiries we have, and a fun thing to talk about in part, is the story of a farm property here that once held exotic animals that was open to the public, and it was referred to as Miles Park Farm. Located around what is now Dunwin Drive and its intersection with Dundas Street on the north side of Dundas Street, between Dunwin and Fifth Line West. So it's a little bit of a forgotten story because Miles Park Farm existed a long time ago for what was a relatively short period of time. There's a simple note in a file that we had some years ago that referred to an elephant burial having taken place in the confines of Miles Park Farm. And so that involved a little bit more digging to try to source out that material and the information therein regarding its claim, if you will. Was there indeed an elephant buried? And it has turned out to be quite an interesting story to explore. So stepping back a little bit, A.W. Miles was an undertaker living in Toronto, in the Mimico area of Toronto, and he held a small private zoo in Mimico beginning in 1912. By 1936, due to pressure from town council, A.W. Miles was forced to relocate. And he sold his property in Mimico, and he purchased property here in historic Mississauga on the west side of the city, just north of Dundas Street, between what is now Fifth Line West and Dunwin Drive. And about a 200 just shy of 200 acre farm property that he had purchased, and he established his new zoo, or his new location for his zoo, and again it was dubbed Miles Park Farm. Some references refer to it as Miles Farm Park, but Miles Park Farm was the name of the enterprise. And that was in 1936. By 1938, Miles Park Farm had become one of the most popular recreational and social gathering destinations within historic Mississauga. We can see it in newspaper advertisings and the photographs that have been shared. It quite a beloved local area within the community. Animals, many of which were public were able to engage with, were delighted visitors. These included llamas and donkeys, and two of the donkeys, their favorites that children would ride, were called Jenny and Dolly. They had at least 3 bears, black bears, in the park. Whether they're all together or over time, we're not entirely sure. The bears were known as Bruno, Master Bear, and Jimmy. Jimmy the bear was quite a favorite one, and quite a few stories survive of Jimmy. They also featured peacocks, 2 camels, and monkeys. But in particular, back to Jimmy the bear, just to share a fun story with Jimmy. He began his life at the park as a bear cub, and he grew to be quite an imposing figure of a black bear. He figured out how to drink from the water fountain himself, so he was able to get a drink when he desired to do so, and he was particularly fond of ice cream. From time to time, it was said that Jimmy liked to go for a walk. That is, he left the property, and he would make his way down Dundas Street in Arundel and stop at the Arundel General Store, the Barker family Arundel General Store and Garage. and the Barkers were said to have fed the bear ice cream and called the office at Miles Park Farm to let them know that Jimmy had come for a walk again. And sooner or later, an old pickup truck from the farm would arrive. They'd open the passenger seat, and the bear would hop into the passenger seat of the truck, and away they'd go back to Miles Park Farm. So Jimmy was quite tame, and again with an extreme fondness for ice cream. So quite a fun little story of that. But aside from Jimmy the bear, by far the most popular tenant of Miles Park Farm was Tootsie the elephant. Tootsie originally came from Burma as a baby, and grew to be a very tame elephant. Lots of imagery of children riding on Tootsie and having their pictures taken with Tootsie, and just a beloved animal within the community within Miles Park Farm. Sadly, tragedy struck Miles Park Farm in the form of a fire on Sunday, February 14th of 1943. It was Sunday, February 14th of 1943, when two of the barns on the farm property caught fire and burned to the ground. In total, 70 animals were lost, unfortunately, including Tootsie. Back to the note in the file that we have, it recalls that Tootsie's bones were buried buried on the property in a funeral that was attended by many saddened school children from the area. We have talked to people in the past, one notable past resident who remembers attending that funeral in 1943, and recalled the ceremony of burying Tootsie's bones. Miles Park Farm remained in operation until the early 1950s, when it closed to the public and the property was later sold for development. Although we don't know the location for certain, somewhere on the property of what was Miles Park Farm, Tootsie the elephant was buried. Possibly one location is identified, modern Brookmead Park, which is on part of the Miles Park Farm property, as being a possible location somewhere within the park where Tootsie was buried. A former resident who also remembered Tootsie in Miles Park Farm believed that she was buried closer to where South Common Mall is today. So we don't know for certain the location where she was laid to rest, but we can say that there is indeed an elephant buried in Mississauga. Thank you for your question. Another question on Ask a Historian this week is relating to the famous flight of an airship over Streetsville in 1930. Yes, indeed, Rob, thank you for your question. But yes, indeed, on August 11th, 1930, a giant airship known as R100 flew over historic Mississauga. Specifically, its route followed the Credit River Valley as it made its way from Niagara Falls back to Toronto and ultimately Montreal. Strong headwinds along the shoreline of Lake Ontario forced the airship to deviate slightly inland, and it hugged the lowlands of the river valleys to kind of get out of the headwind and make its course back eastward. In the course of this, it endeavored its way along the Credit River Valley and flew low over Streetsville in the Credit River in the midday of August 11th of 1930. And there's a picture that survives of the R100 airship flying low over the Streetsville Power Dam. The story of the R100, however, it's a fascinating one, albeit short-lived. The R100 started its life in Europe as a concept in the 1920s, when Great Britain, England, felt that it was falling behind in the development of airships. Germany had forged ahead in the development of Zeppelins. They made a German Zeppelin made its around the world flight in early 1929, and to correct what they saw as falling behind in its primary competition, and to improve communications across the British Empire, the Great Britain ordered 2 airships in 1924. both to be built to the same specifications. They were numbered R100 and R101. R100 was to be built by a private enterprise and was to fly to Canada to demonstrate the viability of commercial airship service across the Atlantic. R101 was to be built by the government and in the Air Ministry, and to fly to India, again connecting the far-flung regions of the empire. Both airships were considerably faster in the routes they would take than traditional ocean liners, so they had something of a commercial viability to them. So R100, we'll follow the career of R100. It's the one that came to Canada. R100 flew from Britain to Montreal, where it was tied up at a specially built mooring mast at St. Hubert Airfield on the outskirts of Montreal. From there it made a 24-hour round trip through Ottawa, Toronto, Niagara Falls, and returned to England. And these events had left England at the end of July and was in Canada through the first couple of weeks of August of 1930. R100 left its base at Cardington, at 45 miles north of London, England, at dawn on July 29th of 1930. The Atlantic crossing was uneventful, and by Thursday, July 31st, it was sailing up or flying up the St. Lawrence before reaching Quebec City and ultimately Montreal. At dawn on August 1st of 1930, R100 moored at the St. Hubert Airport, again, a specially built a mooring tower, for several consecutive days the airship was open to the public, and it's estimated that for several days more than 100,000 people flocked to the St. Hubert airfield to see R100. Quite a remarkable aircraft, and there's historic pictures showing the throngs of people coming to see this behemoth of the sky. The airship itself left St. Hubert, the airstrip, for its tour of southern Ontario at dawn on August 11th of 1930. Along its route, which hugged the shoreline of Lake Ontario, after visiting Ottawa, came down across Kingston and then Toronto and ultimately Niagara Falls, it attracted attention all along its route. There are many photographs of R100 along its route. Local historian, the late Verna May Weeks, witnessed the passage of R100 and wrote about it in her book My Villages of Mississauga, and she reminisced that suddenly and silently the ship glided into view, seemingly to come right out of the corner of her house, this behemoth of the sky, which was elegant to see fly over. The ship did not linger long in Canada. Its round trip from St. Hubert and back to St. Hubert all took place on August 11th of 1930, and that's the point in time in the midday of August 11th on its return trip for Niagara Falls. The ship was photographed over the Credit River in Streetsville. After its return to St. Hubert, within a couple of days, it was on its way back to Great Britain for its first and only journey to Canada. R100's sister ship, the R101, did not fare well on its own maiden journey to India just a few months later. In early October, R101 left Cardington, and a few hours later it crashed in France, killing most of those on board. The tragedy put an end to Britain's involvement with giant airships, and in a very short time later, R100 was broken up for scrap, despite the fact that it was a success in its maiden voyage. There's a book, if you're interested in more. It's called R100 in Canada, and written by Barry Countryman, and highly recommend it, particularly for the photographs in the book. A great number of amazing archival photographs of this remarkable airship and its one-time journey to Canada. The Streetsville photograph is not in the book. That came from a private collector at some point, and just a fascinating look at a particular moment in time, literally a moment in time, probably no more than an hour, maybe even less than that, when R100 was over the skies of historic Mississauga. Special thank you to Eric Gibson and the late Bob Lang for background information on this subject. R100 has been something that has fascinated local historians for many years, particularly given its short tenure in the skies over historic Mississauga and indeed over Canada, but something that gathered a great deal of attention and interest at the time, and continues to percolate in thought. So yes, indeed, there was a moment in time when a giant airship made its way across the skies of historic Mississauga. And that was back in August of 1930. Thank you.
Okay, well, our next question on Ask a Historian is from Anita, and thank you, Anita, for reaching out to us and sharing your inquiring about your community. Your question was who Clarkson Road is named for, and very simply, an answer to that, it's named for Warren Clarkson, but that doesn't really probably give you enough information as to what you're looking for. Warren Clarkson himself was born in 1793 in Albany, New York. So he was born in the United States. In 1808, he traveled to York, what is now Toronto, and he met with the Monger and Marigold families. And that convinced him to purchase land along what is now Clarkson Road. He amassed in 1819 120 acres along what is now a road that carries his name. At the time, it was not as such. It was simply a dirt tract dividing two lots. Warren Clarkson married Susanna Shook, a local to the area, and was neighbors with and contemporaries with the Marigold family, the Monger family, the Bradley family, and many others. Warren was very involved in his community. In 1835, he opened the first general store along what is now Clarkson Road. And in 1855, when the railway came through the area, a portion of land was set aside on his property for the railway station. And it carried the name of Clarkson's, and Clarkson's Corners became a vernacular term for the community that would evolve. In time, Clarkson's Corners were simply shortened to Clarkson. The road itself was officially named Clarkson Road in 1850, one of our earliest such named roads in the community, and it reflected the association to the individual who was very enterprising and involved in the community life of the village that would come to be, that namely being Warren Clarkson. Warren himself passed away in 1882. He's buried in Spring Creek Cemetery along Clarkson Road. And if you're driving along Clarkson Road in your community and you see a giant stone angel right near the road at the edge of the cemetery, that marks the resting place for Warren Clarkson. There are many ways to explore the history of your community, and you might be fascinated in just kind of touching on the different aspects of the community in which you live. Some of the great ways that we have in our community involve the Museums of Mississauga. Namely the Benares Historic House and the Bradley Museum in Clarkson are fascinating ways. And you live right within that community, you can reach out and visit these sites. A little bit challenging perhaps now, but that won't always be the case. So joining me today is Elizabeth Underhill, who is the Supervisor of Museums and Education with the Museums of Mississauga. And I welcome Elizabeth. Thank you for joining us. And Anita, I was wanting Elizabeth to explore some of those other associations and how you might be able to connect within your community. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Hi, Anita. I'm so happy to be here and able to answer your question. It was very kind of Matthew to invite me to participate. So if you haven't had a chance already, I'd like to encourage you to check out your community museums here in Clarkson Village in Mississauga. As Matthew said, I am here working at the Bradley Museum, and it is a nice little wooded lot just off of South Down Road on Orr Road, and you can learn about some of the early settlers. Matthew mentioned the Bradley family, who would have been contemporaries of Warren Clarkson. So we have that one site that once it's possible to open to the public, you're welcome to come and visit. For now, it's okay to walk through the grounds of the museum. And we also have the Benares Historic House, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary of opening to the public this year. And that is a wonderful home that has been restored to what it would have looked like in 1918. And you can go in and visit the family's collection, the people who lived there for the whole house's history, the Harris and Sayers families. They have everything from that family in that house. So it's a great spot to come in and do a guided tour once we get back open to the public again. But in the meantime, there's a lot to still do from home that you can enjoy and learn about. So we have, for example, on our City of Mississauga Museums website, you can visit and actually get a virtual tour of the Bradley House. So that's really cool. You can see how those early settlers lived, what life in Mississauga would have looked like back in the 1830s. And I'll share that link with Matthew so he can give it to you. We also have a number of activities on our website. It's called Art from Home, Wellness Through the Arts. And you can look at that page. There are a lot of interesting resources about the museums and other things that are happening in the Culture Division at the City of Mississauga. So if you want to learn more about the things that we have in our collection, all these old family heirlooms and things that have been passed down through the years, you can check us out online and learn more about your community history through those online galleries of our different artifacts. So hopefully, you know, when business goes back to normal, we'll have lots of different things available for people. We do free guided tours of our museums. We do lots of education programs for all sorts of school groups that come and visit us, and they learn how to cook food like the early settlers did. We also have a really lovely partnership with the Indigenous Network in Peel Region, and they run a sweat lodge out of Bradley Museum. So they have this traditional Indigenous form of healthcare and healing that happens on our site, and you can come and you can actually see the sweat lodge and learn a little bit more about that culture, and definitely reach out to the Indigenous Network to learn more about that as well. So we try to talk about our early settler history, but also as well the many Indigenous communities and societies that were in Mississauga before the settlers arrived and it became known as Clarkson.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You mentioned we have the 25th anniversary of the opening of Benares Historic House.
Yes.
I know at one point there were plans. I'm assuming those are evolving as we go. But is there anything you can share with us about the story of Benares and perhaps how visitors can connect to Benares?
So that's a really great question. Hopefully we will be able to do something to celebrate the 25th anniversary, but for now there are a lot of really great things online that you can see. So we do have a virtual tour of Benares as well. And the descendants of the Harris family that built the house, we have Jeffrey, Dora, and Beverly Sayers were their maiden names. They were very generous to share this house and share their history with the City of Mississauga. And we have a number of videos of Barbara talking about her memories of that house and what it was like growing up there and what her family did. So you can see those videos on our website as well. And that's kind of an interesting little glimpse into the past of what Mississauga was like back in the day.
And really one of the gems in the culture crown of Mississauga. It's just a fantastic site.
It's a really special place because, like I said, it's over 90% of the artifacts in that house are original to the Harris family. So that's a really rare and unique thing to be able to go in and see. Is this is how these people live their lives, and it's a really great reflection of what life in Mississauga was like in 1918 towards the end of the First World War.
And I also wanted to touch on the museums, particularly the Bradley site, does some amazing programming within the community. But you know, one of my favorites, I've young children at home, school-age children as well, is Maple Magic that takes place. And I know that's just past now, taking place in March. But certainly one of the I don't know what the right word is, but one of the crowning events for the museums each year, I think, is Maple Magic. So, Anita, from your question, you may have even already been to something like that or been curious about it. So,
yes.
I highly recommend it. And Elizabeth and your staff do such an incredible job. And if you like pancakes, you have to go there.
Oh, yeah. We make the pancakes there on site. We serve them with real Canadian maple syrup. And as I mentioned, that virtual tour of the Bradley House, well, we've got one of the Anchorage, which is the other historic home at the Bradley Museum, the Skinner family. And we had up in the Anchorage an exhibition all around the history of maple syrup. So you can still visit that exhibition online on our website. And it's National Indigenous History Month, so we are getting ready to share a number of interviews that we did with elders from different First Nations who spoke with us about Indigenous maple sugaring.
And that's going to be online?
That's going to be online too.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
So you'll have to share with me some links too, because we'll put these on the
Yes.
at the end of the video as well, and ways to explore and connect within our community, and some great resources out there. And thank you for reaching out to us and being inquisitive about the place that you live. It's a different way that we can explore. We can't all just kind of walk out the door and walk into a museum or a store as freely as we want to. Maybe we'll get back there, but in the meantime, keep being curious. Keep, as someone once said to me, keep turning over the stones and seeing what lies underneath. People like myself and Elizabeth, we're still there, we're still working, and we're still connecting and wanting to share stories and information about the place in which we live and work and love dearly. And it's well worth exploring, regardless of the nature of your inquiry. Explore your community, wonder about why things are named, and where those stories come from, and try to find out how to find out more. And it's well worth the exploration, and a really fun way to highlight our history, our culture, our story, and maybe through the links that are available to us, become part of the story. And
exactly,
really enjoy that. So Elizabeth, thank you very much for being part, and we look forward to when we get more questions in, coming back on and talking some more. So
awesome, thanks.
Our next question revolves around historic properties on Clarkson Road, right by the railway crossing, 1130 to 1140 Clarkson Road. And thank you, Andrew, for your question. The buildings in question, there are 3 buildings, 2 side by side, and then a smaller house set back in from the road, right in the corner of Balsam and Clarkson Road. They're collectively known as the former Clarkson General Store, the former Clarkson Post Office in the middle, and then the William Clarkson House. William was the son of Warren Clarkson, after whom Clarkson and Clarkson Road are named. The buildings have essentially sat unused since the mid-1990s. There's some challenges therein in terms of their upkeep, and a little bit of ambiguity in terms of their future, and I'll get into that a little bit. The former Clarkson General Store and William Clarkson House are designated under the terms of the Ontario Heritage Act for their cultural and associative value, and these are one of the last visible reminders of the historic core of the village of Clarkson. The first store on the property, and this is the building that is closest to the railway tracks on the south side of the property, is the site of the first store. The building that's there today is not the first store, it is a replacement structure, but the first store was built on the property in 1835 by Warren Clarkson. The store was rebuilt or replaced about 1865 by Warren's son William. The 1865 store in turn was greatly altered and expanded by Edith Clarkson. So multiple generations of the Clarkson family operated the general store and post office in Clarkson. It's the 1906 building that we see today. That's the building on the south end of the property. The building in the middle has probably undergone the most alterations over time. That's an adjacent post office that was built by the Clarkson family as well. And then the William Clarkson house at the north end of the property, right at Balsam. That's the private home, the former private home of William Clarkson, Warren Clarkson's son, and it was built circa 1865, around the time that the previous general store had been built. The store as we see it today is purportedly the first location of a telephone in Clarkson in 1906. Edith Clarkson herself passed away in 1919, at which time the store was sold and left the Clarkson family. And so after that time, the store was run by H. Hare, J. Jameson, a W.T. McCord, and a Henry Gerhardt, who purchased it in 1944. And under Gerhardt's ownership, it became known as the Carload Groceteria. And over time, it was also home to the Clarkson Pet Food and Supplies and to the Normandy House craft store. So multiple uses over time for the old Clarkson General Store building. The Clarkson Store and William Clarkson House are among the few remaining tangible elements, physical elements, connecting to the historic core of Clarkson, centered on Clarkson Road and the railway tracks, indeed Clarkson's Corners. I cannot prognosticate onto the future of the buildings. We do hope that their situation will be clearer in the future, hopefully the near future, and there will be a path forward that will allow the buildings to become rejuvenated and vital components and become vital components of the Clarkson area into the future. We're hoping that the issues around the buildings will be resolved and they will have a significant future moving forward, as they are valuable components of the heritage and culture of the community of Clarkson. So again, the Clarkson General Store and William Clarkson House have rich histories in the community, and they are designated under the terms of the Ontario Heritage Act. So hopefully that answers some of your questions today. So thank you for the question.